are listening to Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. I'm your host, Janice Horton. Welcome to episode 6, in which I want to share with you my top 10 castles in Dumfries and Galloway, which is in southwest Scotland. I know that Scotland will be a top destination for many of you this year, but some visitors to Scotland wrongly assume that you have to go all the way up to the Highlands to find fine examples of historic Scottish castles and imposing castle ruins. Indeed, some people drive over the border from England and straight through Dumfries and Galloway, not realising its treasures. I think that kind of makes this area like a secret location. Right now, the backpacking husband and I are renting a house in this beautiful region of Dumfries and Galloway. It's very close to where we lived for many years and where we brought up our children. And so, finding ourselves back here again, in many ways, feels like life has come full circle for us. Here we are fortunate to be surrounded by familiar green hills and glens and many historic attractions. And when family and friends come to visit, they can hardly believe how many old castles are all around us here in Dumfries and Galloway. And it's not just the castles, as there are many interesting old towns and timeless villages in this area. Along the Solway Firth estuary, the third largest estuary in the UK and an area of conservation, there are expanses of rugged coastline and sandy bays and fabulous beaches at Rockcliffe, Southerness, Sandy Hills and Balcarry Bay. Inland, there are deep forests and glens, rivers and lochs, and being blessed by a warmer climate than most other parts of Scotland, thanks to the position of the Gulf Stream, there are also lots of large parks and botanical gardens to explore. Did you know that Dumfries and Galloway Forest Park is home to Europe's second international dark sky park? It's the first of its kind in the UK, due to practically non-existent levels of light pollution here. Many of these fabulous natural features and lots of other attractions and interesting places in the region are explored in more detail as part of my Exploring Scotland series of posts on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com. There are indeed many castles in Dumfries and Galloway. Some are not ruins at all, but have been lovingly maintained or restored as grand family homes, and some have been renovated into hotels where you can stay. So even though I had a long list of castles and castle ruins, medieval tower houses and old forts throughout the region to choose from, I wanted to share with you my own personal favourites and tell you a little about their rich history, from those castles that are located close to my present home in Scotland. Aside from my neighbour, the mighty and famous Drumlanrig Castle, the castles in this post are what I would call romantic ruins, ages old and typically Scottish in wild settings that reek of a fabulous and often quite brutal but nonetheless fascinating history. Again, on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com, I have a corresponding post to this podcast entitled My Top 10 Castles in Dumfries and Galloway, and there you'll find photos of all the castles that I'm about to mention to you, and the map that I've created showing you how to locate each one. Number 1 is Drumlanrig Castle. Drumlanrig Castle is the Dumfriesshire home of the 10th Duke and Duchess of Buccleuch and Queensberry. The castle is set in a beautiful garden and within a vast 90,000-acre country estate. It is said that the incredible views across the Nith Valley are what inspired the first Duke of Buccleuch to build his ancestral home in this location, and on land that was given to him by Robert the Bruce. The castle was built at great expense, even for a duke, and construction took 10 years. My own cottage home, the one I mentioned earlier, in which my husband and I lived for most of our married life, and where we brought up our 3 children, was once part of the Buccleuch estate. We bought our cottage from the estate as a derelict shepherd's bothy back in the late 1980s, and we renovated and extended it into our family home. I once had the pleasure of meeting His Grace, the present 10th Duke, having met his father, the late 9th Duke, several times. Back then, I was a self-employed graphic designer, and I often conferred with the late Duke on his designs for the castle's visitors' brochures. I even designed the label for His Grace's own brand of Drumlanrig Scottish whisky. As Drumlanrig Castle was so close to our home, it's where I would take our 3 boisterous boys while they were growing up to ride their bicycles, play in the adventure playground, fish in the pond, and to explore the gardens and the woodland areas, where there were so many paths and walking routes. A favourite spot for our boys to play was in the forest on the estate and on a narrow wooden bridge from which they'd throw their poo sticks into the burn, a burn being the Scottish name for a stream. Drumlanrig Castle is one of Scotland's finest examples of Renaissance architecture, and its treasures with works of art from Thomas Gainsborough, Allan Ramsay, Sir Joshua Reynolds and Rembrandt are impressive and reputably priceless. Daniel Defoe says of Drumlanrig in his Scottish sojourn of 1720, "A palace so glorious, gardens so fine, and everything so truly magnificent, all in a wild mountainous country." Drumlanrig Castle is built of red sandstone and known locally as the Pink Palace. It's been the seat of the Douglas family for around 600 years. A Douglas stronghold, it was built with the clan motto, "Forward, Brave Heart," which, although was used in the movie of the same name, depicting William Wallace starring Mel Gibson, it was actually said by James Douglas, also known as the Black Douglas, about his friend, the King Robert the Bruce. Douglas, who lived between 1286 and 1330, carried the embalmed heart of Robert the Bruce with him on pilgrimage, and he famously threw the heart forward into a battle, saying, "Forward, brave heart," as he'd pledged to do. And on this day there are many carvings in the castle stone walls of a winged heart. A painting by Leonardo da Vinci, known as Madonna of the Yarnwinder, estimated to be worth £20 million, was stolen during a daring robbery at the castle in 2003 by a gang posing as tourists. It was recovered in 2007, but unfortunately after the 9th Duke's death. The castle was also used by the producers of the Outlander movies for filming the 2nd series. Do check the Drumlanrig Castle website for opening times and for entrance fees. Number 2 on the list is Sanquhar Castle. Every day I walk along the lane from our house on the riverbank and I cross a bridge over the River Nith. Along this back road I have a fine view of the ruins of Sanquhar Castle, and I often try to imagine it as it must have looked to those who lived in this part of Scotland so very long ago. Sanquhar Castle is now a ruined 13th century castle with evidence of towers and a courtyard, but it was once an important stronghold of the powerful Crichton family. In 1639 the castle was sold to Sir William Douglas of Drumlanrig, who then went on to build the aforementioned Drumlanrig Castle. Both William Wallace and Robert the Bruce are said to have visited. Kings and queens are also said to have stayed in the castle. Edward I in 1298, Mary Queen of Scots in 1568, and James VI in 1617. The castle fell vacant around 1690 and is now in the ownership of the Marquis of Bute, the Lord Sanquhar. Sanquhar Castle is easily seen, and in an unfortunate and sad state given its remarkable history. It's accessible from the A76 road on the southern outskirts of Sanquhar. It's also adjacent to the Southern Upland Way. But unfortunately, I can't recommend that you explore the castle too closely, as it is in a ruined state, and it could be deemed to be dangerous. 2 ghosts reportedly haunt the castle. The White Lady is said to be the spirit of a young woman called Marion, who is said to have disappeared in 1590. A skeleton of a girl was reportedly found during excavations in 1875. Another ghost is said to be that of John Wilson, who was wrongly hanged by the Crichtons and who manifests himself with groans and the rattling of chains. The Marquis of Bute, a lover and restorer of buildings from the Middle Ages, undertook a period of restoration of Sanquhar Castle from 1895 to 1901, but he died before the work was completed. Number 3 on my list is nearby Morton Castle. Once part of a chain of castles along the strategically important Nith Valley route, which runs from the Solway Firth north to the Clyde Valley. Like Sanquhar Castle, Morton Castle is a mid to late 13th century fortified stone hall house, said to have originally dated from 1307. It was one of the strongholds dismantled under the terms of the 1357 Treaty of Berwick between England and Scotland, in exchange for the release of David II from captivity in England. It was rebuilt in the 1400s. It sits on high ground amongst the Lowther Hills, with steep slopes down to Morton Loch. The castle is now in ruins, but the remains consist of a rectangular two-storey block with what would have been an impressive gatehouse and a circular tower with a pit prison below. In 1459, the hall was a stronghold of the Douglases and occupied until 1715. Morton Castle is within walking or cycling distance of my home here in Scotland, and it's a place I used to take my children to play and to picnic in the summertime. The castle has a long history, and for me it holds special memories of hot summer days when my children were young. Historic Scotland says of Morton Castle, one of Scotland's most enigmatic castles, a rare hall house standing in a location as breathtaking as it is remote. Morton Castle is located 17 miles northwest of Dumfries on the A76. Join the A702 northeast of Thornhill at Carronbridge. The road leading to the castle is unmarked and just a single track, so there's a bit of an adventure to find it, but don't give up because there's no entrance fee to walk around the castle and to enjoy the tranquility and beauty of the setting. It's well worth the investigation. Interestingly, Robert II betrothed his daughter Agida to William Douglas, the son of Archibald Douglas, the Lord of Galloway, a dowry of the castle of Morton. And since this time, the castle and the lands of Morton have been in the possession of the family of Douglas. In 1810, the Scots, the Dukes of Buccleuch and of the Castle Drumlanrig, succeeded this and other properties of the Dukes of Queensberry. The Morton Castle was used as a location in the 1978 version of the 39 Steps with Robert Powell, as was the village of Durrisdeer. Morton Castle is often cited as one of the best-kept secrets in Scotland, due to its location and a distinct lack of signposts. For more information, the website is Historic Environment Scotland. Number 4 on my list is Calaverack Castle. Calaverack Castle offers the visitor more than just a ruin to explore. There's a coffee shop and exhibits and a visitors centre, and also a castle-themed adventure park for the children. This made my visit here when my 3 boys were young a great success. The castle's proximity to the English border meant that Calaverack Castle was embroiled in the Wars of Independence almost as soon as it was built. This castle takes a little effort to get to, as Calaverack lies just off the B725, some 7 miles south of Dumfries, close to where the River Nith flows into the Solway Firth. The story of Calaverack Castle begins with the granting of lands in the area to Sir John de Maxwell, in 1220. So what we now know of as Calaverack Castle was completed in the 1270s and was occupied by Herbert Maxwell, the son of Sir Aymar and nephew of Sir John. And between 1299 and 1634, the castle was besieged many times and changed hands between the Scottish and the English through sporadic and bloody battles. In 1640, Calaverack was held by the Maxwells for King Charles I against a besieging army of Covenanters. To explain, Covenanters were those people in Scotland who signed the National Covenant in 1638. They signed this covenant to confirm their opposition to the interference by the Stuart kings in the affairs of the Presbyterian Church of Scotland. And damage to Calaverack Castle, caused by the Covenanters during and after the siege, was never repaired. So what you see today is pretty much what was left after the summer of 1640. Lord Robert Maxwell fled the country and spent the rest of his life in exile on the Isle of Man, where he died in 1646. Calaverat Castle is a fine example of a moated, triangular, twin-towered medieval stronghold. It was placed into state care in 1946 and is now looked after by Historic Environment Scotland. You can also find the foundations of another, much earlier castle visible at the end of a nature trail through the woods to the south. The Maxwell clan also owned Thrieve Castle. Number 5 is Thrieve Castle, and it's a short drive from Dumfries on the A75. With its gardens and nature reserve, it's well signposted, and Thrieve Castle makes for a great day out in the summer. The castle is a formidable site, built by Archibald the Grim in 1369. So named because his face was so ferocious looking in battle. Archibald Douglas died at Thrieve in 1400. The massive tower house is a mostly intact fortress standing 30 metres tall. It's been attacked many times over hundreds of years and has changed hands surprisingly often considering its formidable marshy surroundings and a fortified island location. In 1455, the castle was besieged by King James II for 2 months, and it fell after the king bribed the garrison to surrender. Thrieve Castle was finally abandoned in 1640. The castle on its island is accessed by half a mile or so of walk to the ferry point along some farmland paths. At the small jetty, pull on the rope and the brass bell loudly, and the boatman will come across from the island to take you to the castle on a short and rather romantic boat ride over the River Dee. A silver penny, minted in 1300, was found during excavations on the island in the 1970s. Unexplained ghostly breathing noises have been heard in Thrieve Castle. But hundreds of years ago, Thrieve Island was much smaller than today and the water level higher. It was also used as a prison for French prisoners during the Napoleonic Wars. For more information on Thrieve Castle, and to check the opening and closing times and entrance fees, go to the Historic Environment Scotland website. Number 6 on my list is Kenmure Castle. Kenmure Castle is a spooky and atmospheric ruined 16th century fortified mansion or castle. It sits 1 mile south of the town of New Galloway in southwest Scotland and to the north of Loch Ken. Kenmure has been suggested as a possible birthplace in 1249 of John Balliol, who went on to become the King of Scotland. It later belonged to the Douglas and the Maxwell families. Kenmure Castle became a property of the Gordon family from 1297, and a heraldic panel bearing their arms surmounts the south door. The core of the present building was largely erected in the 17th century, but by 1790 Kenmure Castle was described as a ruin. Interestingly, the Scottish bard Robert Burns, who lived between 1759 and 1796, visited Kenmure Castle, and it was here that Burns was inspired to write his song Scots Wha Hae. A sundial bearing the date 1623 from Kenmure is now in Dumfries Museum, and there are stories of tunnels leading away from the castle. It's said to be haunted by a headless piper, the Headless Piper of Kenmure. For more information on Kenmure Castle, I'd recommend the castlesofscotland.co.uk website. Number 7, Cardonness Castle. Now this is an interesting one. The lands of Cardonness, situated southwest of what is now Gatehouse of Fleet near Castle Douglas, were in the hands of the notoriously lawless MacCulloch family in 1466. The MacCulloch lairds built the present Cardonness Castle in the late 15th century, and in the late 17th century, financial mismanagement following the execution of Sir Godfrey MacCulloch for the murder of a Clan Gordon neighbour led to the loss of the castle to their family enemy. The castle is a fine example of a 6-storey Scottish tower house. It has basement chambers and there are several floors connected by a spiral staircase. The floors have all gone, but you can still see the grand fireplaces and where the rooms would have been. There are superb views over the beautiful Fleet Bay to the Solway Firth beyond. The castle is at the top of a very steep hill, and today it's reached up a steep concrete path with 33 steps and a steep ramp from the courtyard to the castle entrance. Legend has it that the McCullochs, celebrating the arrival of a long-awaited male heir after 9 daughters, were holding a party on a frozen pond. The ice broke and all the McCulloch family perished, except for one daughter who was ill in bed. The pit prison at Cardonness is where the McCullochs kept any unwelcome visitors, and it is one of the best surviving in a Scottish Tower House castle. Next on my list is number 8, McClellan's Castle. In 1569, the land at the south side of the River Dee, together with the convent buildings standing in the centre of what is now Kirkcudbright town centre, were acquired by Sir Tom McClelland of Bombay, Provost of Kirkcudbright. Thomas McClelland demolished the convent, leaving only the chancel to serve as the burial vault for his family. Construction of McClellan's Castle began around 1577, and Sir Thomas was not above bending the law to further his interests in Kirkcudbright. But he overstepped the mark in detaining a cargo ship in Kirkcudbright Harbour in 1575. And 2 years later he was in trouble again after being caught purchasing wine from a known pirate. McClelland's Castle is laid out in an L plan, consisting of 2 wings meeting at right angles. The 4-storey castle has a kitchen on the ground floor and a great hall on the first floor for entertaining guests. The upper floors most likely provided accommodation. McClelland's Castle was always more for show than for defence. The family sold the castle in 1752, and from 1782 to 1912 it was held by the Earls of Selkirk. The castle is now under the care of Historic Environment Scotland. There is a secret spy hole behind the Great Hall fireplace known as the Laird's Lug, and used by the owner to eavesdrop on his guests. James VI visited in 1587, and he gave Sir Thomas a silver gun, which is now in the Stuartry Museum in Kirkcudbright. Number 9 on the list is Lochmaben Castle. Lochmaben Castle was built by Edward I in the 13th and 14th centuries, and later rebuilt during the reign of James IV of Scotland. It was always an important outpost in hostile territory for the English, and they made tremendous efforts to keep it in their possession throughout the 1300s. It withstood several sieges and attacks before falling to the Scots in 1385. The castle became a royal possession in 1445. James IV initiated works, and later James V was a regular visitor. The castle remained a major site in wars with the English, before it was finally abandoned in the 1700s, after which its stones were taken for use in local buildings. Today it's situated amongst an attractive woodland next to a loch. Interestingly, Mary Queen of Scots and Lord Darnley came to Lochmaben in October 1565. In June 1592, it was said that Francis Stuart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, dressed as a woman to infiltrate and capture the castle. Number 10 on my list, finally we come to Torthorwald Castle. Torthorwald Castle is a large ruined rectangular tower and fortress at the centre of the village of Torthorwald just outside Dumfries. What remains today is a mere shell, but it's still a physical witness to a rich history in the making. The ruins stand on private farmland. However, just like Sanquhar Castle, both the castle and its tower and surrounding earthworks can easily be viewed from adjacent public roads, and on-road parking is possible with care. There is evidence that the first castle on the site was built in the 12th century and owned by Sir David Torthorwald. In the 1400s, the castle is passed to Thomas Carlyle, and the building of a substantial tower house begins. This is the building which forms part of the current ruins seen today. The basement and the first floor hall of this tower are vaulted, and in one corner is a turnpike stair that leads to the upper floors. It appears that the original entrance was on the first floor. Notably, Thomas Carlyle was married to the sister of Robert the Bruce. In 1544, in a fierce family dispute, the castle was attacked by Carlyle in a raid against his own sister-in-law. In 1609, the castle passed by marriage to the Douglases. Douglas of Torthorwald had vowed to avenge the execution of his relation, the Earl of Morton, by the Earl of Arran, who was a protector and favourite to the young King James IV. Douglas gave chase to Arran while on his travels through the hills, and the king's favourite was dragged from his horse by Douglas and stabbed to death. His head, cut from his body, was mounted on a spear and fixed to the walls of Torthorwald Castle. In 1630, repairs to the castle are undertaken. It must have been the work of James Douglas, who did not succeed to Drumlanrig until 10 years later. The last inhabitant of Torthorwald Castle is said to have been one of his younger brothers, Archibald Douglas, and in 1715 the castle is abandoned. The name Torthorwald derives from Hill of Thorthorwald, and efforts were made in the 19th century to stabilise the structure, but the north end of the tower collapsed in 1993. For more interesting information on Torthorwald Castle, try castlefortsbattles.co.uk website. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my favourite castles in Dumfries and Galloway and the rich history that surrounds them. And I hope I've inspired you to go left when heading north and over the border into Scotland, and to explore the beautiful southwest, where there is such a rich history and so many interesting places to explore. For further information before you travel, please check the latest Scottish Government guidance, and for more resources, visit South West Scotland website. You can follow Historic Environment Scotland on Twitter, on Facebook and on Instagram. Have you ever visited any of the castles that I've mentioned? Or any others in Dumfries and Galloway? Don't hesitate to get in touch and tell me about it, will you? I'd love to hear from you, because my podcasts are totally focused on not only inspiring you to achieve your own travel dreams in your midlife and beyond, but also in answering all your travel questions. Email me through my contact page on my website, or get in touch through my social media channels. I'm on Facebook as the Backpacking Housewife. I'm on Instagram as Janice Horton Writer. And if you're on Twitter, please do tweet me your travel goals and your questions at Janice Horton, JANICEHORTON. And come and travel with me here on Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. Subscribe and follow for inspiring and informative new episodes each week, in which I'll be discussing ways to plan for and to prioritise travel in our lives and in our new future, and in what is set to become a new and golden age of travel.